getting up to 13-6 on checkpoint. Former National MP Marilyn Waring agrees donations to political parties should be made public. Marilyn Waring's unimpressed with politics these days. Since 1983, she hasn't belonged to any political party. But from what she's seen, she thinks that now a lot of effort's put in by companies to get the ear of whichever party's in power.
I think the thing that sickens me most is that, you know, there wouldn't be a situation where someone from the Salvation Army or a Women's Refuge or a Rape Crisis Centre or the Māori Women's Welfare League, etc., would be invited to a lunch, you know, at $100 a plate to meet with a minister. I mean, what these kind of events mean is a more and more exclusive elite access to ministers. Well, what the company is buying at that moment is access to that minister in the future.
Former MP Marilyn Waring. Turning to the finance. Gold in Hong Kong, the opening price in US dollars is unchanged at $339 an ounce. The interest rate for 5-year government stock on the secondary market is 7.18%. That's down 0.02% on last night's close. The New Zealand dollar was buying at 54.12 US cents. That's unchanged, and 60.4 Japanese yen, up 51 points.
When I was writing If Women Counted, I'd get up very early in the morning, and at the window the grass would be covered in dew. All you could hear was the wind in the trees, the waves. And the sea and the sky were so clear and blue, and the beach would be empty. When I'd look around the view, you could see the hills rising out of the sea. But when I look at them, just untouched, and they look so beautiful, apparently they're of no value at all, at least according to the economic system.
I'm David Gutnick, and you're listening to CBC Radio 940. For those of you suffering from economics anxiety, there may be some relief on the way. Dr. Marilyn Waring is speaking in Montreal this evening. She's a feminist economist, and she's the author of If Women Counted, published in some countries as Counting for Nothing. Her work has been hailed as having global, even historic significance. I don't know about you, but I think I suffer from economic anxiety. As soon as someone starts talking about the United Nations and global accounts and budgets and free trade and all that stuff.
I think most people do. You're taught that economics is something that is out of reach and you can't touch it and you can't really understand it until somebody like her comes around and says, well, hey, it touches your life as much as it touches international trade.
What do you mean suspicions? What do you mean?
Suspicions that things are not as they seem. Having come from a family where I was raised by a single mother and realizing there were great injustices.
What use is economics if it's not for the people and about the people?
The more that you smoke cigarettes, or the more that you have automobile accidents, the more growth increases. Now, I'd be fairly unlikely, having smashed my car, to come home and say, darling, don't worry about it, we've just contributed to the national income of the country. I mean, I wouldn't run my household like that, and I can't think like that. I would consider that a loss, you know. I would kind of consider that a debit in my account. A cost, not a benefit. National income accounting doesn't have a debit side. As long as the activity passes through the market, it's good for growth. Let me give you a very easy example. The voyage of the Exxon Valdez. Now, the Exxon Valdez is most likely the most productive oil tanker voyage ever known on the face of the planet. Now, if it had simply loaded up its oil in Alaska and made its way down the west coast and discharged into a bunker, it would have been a moderately productive voyage in economic terms. But if you want to have fantastic growth, it's a very good idea to ram your tanker into an iceberg. Immediately, there are the insurance costs and the new tanker. This is great for growth. Then there are the civil legal proceedings and the criminal legal proceedings. Immediately, of course, there's the payment for the clean-up operation. Then down the way a little bit, there are the compensations to fisher people and the compensations to the tourist industry. And of course, there is the film, the television rights, the book, the various newspaper and media exercises that go on. And of course, consequently, there is the influx of subscriptions to memberships of every greenie organisation you can think of. A fantastically productive oil tanker voyage. You see what I mean? It all added to growth. Nobody stood there and said, dearie me, just lost an oil tanker, better subtract that from the national income accounts.
I think most economists place a affirmative value on being incomprehensible. Indeed, they seem to value their work in inverse ratio to their ability to be understood. There's some exceptions to that. John Kenneth Galbraith, for instance, writes comprehensibly. But Marilyn, because her goal is to be understood, she understands very well that if people don't have the information, they can't act on it. Demystifies the language and really makes economics, as it should be, simply the way we impute value to that which we consider valuable.
The word economics, from the Greek oikonomikos, it means the care and management of a household. Economics has pretensions to being concerned with notions of value. The word value is defined from the Latin valore. It's a beautiful word. It means to be strong or to be worthy. It has nothing to do with capital or material gain.
On the New Zealand share market, the NZSE 40 Capital Index finished the day at 1,627 points. That's up 22. The share market was busy this afternoon. There were 39 rises and 20 falls on a total turnover of $53.8 million. That's the finance, and that's all from Checkpoint.
In Canada right now, we've just signed a free trade agreement with the United States and Mexico. We hear that it's a whole question of productivity. This is going to be good for economies. This is going to boost our GNP. We look across to Europe, and the same thing is happening in Europe. The Maastricht Treaty is signed, and all these countries are saying, well, yeah, this will be great for, we'll be coming together. This will be good for our economies. How does someone like you react to that?
Well, it might change GDP figures. But you're starting from the wrong premise. I mean, all of these decisions were based on the wrong figures in the first place. For 10, 20 years, we've had these cliches, we've heard this rhetoric, you know, inside or outside discussions on free trade. You tell us things are getting better, it's perfectly obvious to us. Our air is getting worse, our education systems are failing the poorest people, there is more poverty, there is more homelessness, there are more housing crises. We might well have growth, you know, you might be proving it to us. But when we look around our communities, we can't see this being realised. In fact, maybe we don't believe it. And I suspect that the unease that is in Canada and in the United States, and let me tell you, in Mexico, about NAFTA, has to do with the fact that it doesn't matter what they say, GDP might grow up, but GDP is utterly unrelated to the well-being of a community. It tells you nothing about levels of poverty. It tells you nothing about the distribution of poverty. It tells you nothing about primary health care, educational standards, environmental cleanliness. And folks have realised that this unidimensional economic fabrication just doesn't bear any relationship to their lives.
Well, but what you're saying, I don't even know if the word radical can contain it, because you're saying all of these ways of looking at economics and the way we discuss trade and productivity up on a blackboard, you just wipe it clean.
Well, I hope the word radical does encompass it, actually, because it comes from the Latin derivation radius. It means from the root of things. It was 1975. It was International Women's Year. I was 22 years old, and I put my name in, and sort of 6 weeks later, with some horror, recognised that I'd just been chosen the candidate for a safe seat that I couldn't lose.
Honourable members of the House of Representatives, you meet here today as members of the 38th Parliament.
Notice of motion ready? Are you? Yes. Noting with amazement that all those wonderful legislative changes proposed in the women's area weren't mentioned in the speech from the throne.
When you came in the door, of course, you should always bow to the Speaker. And then go to your seat here. Whenever
I was a feminist, and I thought women should be in office, but I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be a classical musician.
Right.
I'm not sure whether they've put me up here to keep me quiet or so that I'm nearest the door.
My constituency was almost everything you can see. Basically, the farmers around here really work with the earth, with the forces of nature. So you can see lots of shelter belts retained, lots of planting of trees, not too much scarring of the landscape. It's a wonderful topography here. It's a wonderful shape. It was from the west coast. It included most of the hills and the mountains in the Waikato Basin, so I was quite particular about what was going on in the higher areas.
You know, quite a number of us old-timers were fairly apprehensive. We'd heard a bit about this young woman and her beliefs and so on, so we were a little bit apprehensive about what we were going to come across. They were extraordinary moments for me because people were calling me a radical feminist, and here I was in a constituency that was rural, it was white, it was propertied, it was extremely conservative, and I was working with predominantly men, and I realised then there's nothing radical about what I'm saying at all. Not in the context of land like this, not in the context of values that this land teaches you.
It was in the summer, towards the end of February, I think it was, and I think we must have been making some late hay. And this long-haired young woman knocked on my door and said that she was Marilyn Waring, and I knew who she was. She said she was looking for support for candidacy. And I said, well, look, if you don't mind waiting a minute, I'm just making some scones to get out to the men in the field. And my daughter woke and was very fractious, and I couldn't do that and look after her and look after these scones and the orange juice and the sandwiches and things like that. So Marilyn, bless her, said, well, come on, Susan, we'll take you out to the garden. They picked the white butterfly caterpillars off my rather eaten cabbages. So, and kept her out of the way while I finished doing what I was doing. And then afterwards, we sat down on the step, the cold orange juice, and I said to her, I've never done this sort of thing before. I don't know what sort of questions to ask you as a delegate. And she said, well, I've never been a candidate before, so I can't help you. It was really exciting. The hall exploded. For those of us who were supporting Marilyn, it exploded with cheers, and we felt as if we had done something really very exciting. Of course, we had. And she went on from there to be a very strong, certainly strong person for women's rights, but a conscience, really, for those who are less fortunate.
I loved watching the conservative men of the electorate absolutely sort of hang on every word she said.
Oh, come on.
Oh, come on, they did.
I was
You were one of those, yes.
I don't know that she ever turned down anybody or left an unfinished job. There were Maori problems as well as if there was anything that she thought would be of interest to us or we should know, she came and told us. And that was a new approach, eh? That somebody cared enough. We didn't have to go to Marilyn, she came to us.
I don't suppose, Marilyn, that you'll speak before your maiden speech.
No.
And I'm sure you won't have any problem about this. You've had a good lot of experience, and I've watched you, and I'm absolutely confident that you'll have no trouble at all.
It doesn't make one any less nervous.
Perhaps that's so, but I'm confident that you'll manage it all right.
Dad, could you find a piece of paper and a pen on the desk, please? Yes. And write out on it so I can read it, because I've forgotten to put it at the beginning of my speech. I realise that I am the youngest member of the House.
And I would not presume to teach any members of this House anything about politics. But members should be well aware that occasions will arise when I feel that further representation should be given to the point of view of the youth and the women of this country who are grossly numerically underrepresented in this House. From time to time, when I feel a pressing need to advance the interests of those two groups, I will do so.
Every woman in New Zealand knows about Marilyn Waring and offers up a small thanks to her for making it that much easier for them. I think that's Marilyn's plaque, if you like. It may not be set in metal, but it's written on many women's hearts, I know that.
There's a phrase in Māori, tūranga waiwai, a place to stand. And my constituency was my place to stand. I mean, I came from here. You couldn't shove me out of here, and you couldn't tell me what the people here wanted. You know, I was one of them. And so I had a real legitimacy, because this was my tūranga waiwai.
Marilyn Waring's no-nonsense approach to parliamentary politics earned her respect early. In just her second term, she was appointed chairperson of the prestigious Public Expenditure Committee, a position from which she aired criticism of the effectiveness of controls on government spending, the accountability of politicians, and the dead hand of bureaucracy.
In a small country like New Zealand, this is the sole Budget, Appropriations, Public Accounts Committee of a parliament. So we review everything in terms of the whole 45 government ministries and departments and trading divisions. And of course you can imagine that the situation is about 9 men, you know, in their suits with me, the small junior at the end of the table, faced by Treasury officials or departmental officials at the other end of the table. And I developed the art of the dumb question. I was amazed all the time. They would wheel in out these papers. And the difficulty was they were all full of jargon, economic phrases, and I didn't understand what they meant. So I would wait until it was my turn, and I would say, "What does so-and-so mean?" You know, and they would give you an answer, and I'd say, "Listen, do you have any English that you can explain that in, any real words?" And I can still recall, you know, interchanges when they were briefing me in my office, and they would teach me something, and I would say, "But that's preposterous," or "That's crazy," or "That's ludicrous." And they would say to me, "Oh, well, yes, it is, but those are the rules." And I couldn't believe that these enormous paradoxes or pathologies that I was discovering were part of an international economic system. I thought, you know, maybe it's just we make bad policy in New Zealand. Other countries started to invite me there as their guest. And when you went there, you could ask to see their chairpeople of public accounts committees, their treasury boards, their budget appropriations committees. And I began to realise, hey, it's nothing to do with New Zealand. These are the rules everywhere. And I developed very early a kind of, it was a personal technique, which was in any community that I went into, I'd asked until I was introduced to a woman my age. And I would try and develop a trust in that situation. And then on a number of occasions, spend an entire day with her, you know, telling my little tape recorder what she was doing all the time and taking photographs of her. Well, Tendai was a 14-year-old who lived in the Lurveld in Zimbabwe. And I'm interested in the work days of young women because the International Labour Organization specifies that under 14-year-olds don't work. You've got to realize that in many cultures don't think in terms of morning, afternoon and evening. So the easiest way is just to draw a line in the dirt, mark a point where, you know, the village is, get the sun coming up, the sun at like a midpoint in the morning, the sun directly above the village, and going down in the afternoon, and sunset, and then just stars out in the night time, and then you just sit quietly for however long it takes and work through, you know. When the sun is here, what are you doing? When it's moved to this point, what are you doing? When it's right high in the sky above the village, what's happening then? As it's coming down in the afternoon, where are you? How far from the village are you? At sunrise, at sunset, what's happening then? And when the stars finally come out at night, are you asleep yet or are you still working? There's no leisure in these periods at all, and we're speaking of 16 to 18-hour days every day of the week. And all of the activities that they're involved in this time are unrecorded. They're called non-productive, they're called uneconomic. These women are apparently at leisure during these enormously work-filled days. Time is the one primary thing we all have to exchange, and time use best describes women's lives anyway. There's no reason why we could not do major census surveys in terms of time use, just as we do census surveys for income. These time use surveys were conducted in Pakistan. You can record time use so easily and immediately see the differences in the lifestyles between women and men. You can see here straight away that men engage in about 5 different activities during a day, and that women in about a dozen, that they are continually broken. In addition, you've got to remember that most of these activities are going to be simultaneous with childcare or food preparation. You can see that men's days are much, much shorter than women's. Don't be confused by where these lines are. All of this orange colour is leisure and personal activities. And you'll notice that there's so little of that in respect of women's activities here. When we analysed this in terms of time use, we found that the most exacting activity that took the most time was that for women, for 5 hours every day, they were involved in food preparation and cooking, primarily cooking. And what that demonstrated to us was the complete inefficiency of their tulas, or their cooking stoves. Now, if you want to increase the productivity of this village, the particular technology change that is needed then are new stoves. This is where the priorities lie, and it lies in cutting down that time. In Pakistan, the women needed stoves. In Kenya, the technology priority is inexpensive water pumps to save the women time every day.
Amore bega ni subui na masuju ngonyek kalo mail miet engare. Ora kana na baita engare na iteru aituku enkerai ya saa miet peelo sukuul. Ora kana naituku enkerai ya saa miet peelo sukuul nayiaraki endaa peenya naitoki ayiaraki ena saa 10 ade nalotu endaa. Ore ake paidip nalo olchata amu enkima inok naa enolchata. Ore paashukunye teine nebau enker naliki orkuo neitoki abau enkae saa esaa 12 nebau nkishu nalepisho. Ore endara pookin kaiguan ajo kaitaisere aikunari maili 5 paalaaki enkerai eshule enkare amu meeta. Neeku naas ometadoi enkolong.
And the translator asks, and what do the men do? A man in the crowd answers.
Neitaru aramat entoki pookin natii auluo oldong enkerai enkitok amu enenye. Ore peidip neitaru aing'uraki nkishu enyenak ilchekuti.
Ainyototo siyiok mikitoki aaning' irpayiani metaa ore peekijoki orpayian shomo dakito shomo taasa esiai nijoki kaata sinanu enai naas. Ekijoki matonyok.
It's perfectly obvious that the people who are visible to you as contributors to the economy are the people who will be visible when you make policy. And if you're not visible as a producer in a nation's economy, then you're going to be invisible in the distribution of benefits. And wherever I was, this was the world situation for women. Very often too in say, so-called developed countries, there'll be what you call pay-as-you-go superannuation schemes. So that if you're not earning a salary or a wage, you actually can't contribute. So you frequently have women who have worked fantastically long hours, 40, 45 years. They've never had any cash, say, to put into a superannuation scheme. And at the so-called end of their working life, because they don't stop working till they die, but at that point, the government then says, well, not only have you been invisible, but now you are welfare. Now you are a dependent on the state. Now you are a bludger. Now you're one of our obligations. You know, so you've got this extraordinary choice. You go from being nobody to being a problem, in spite of the fact that of all the people in the population, you just worked harder than anybody else for all those years, except you probably didn't get paid for it. It's becoming part of a global situation for me now. I mean, I'm able to make analogies between the unpaid rural women in Bangladesh or in the Philippines and the woman back in my constituency whose work is also invisible. The magnitude of the invisibility of women's work was a major lesson I learned from my parliamentary experience. For example, as a politician, it was virtually impossible for me to prove a need for childcare facilities. Mothers who are inactive and unoccupied cannot apparently be in need.
They screamed at my brother.
Did they?
Well, I'm Kathy Kyle, and I've been at this play centre for coming up a year. It's a time for the children to play, but it's also a time for the mother. It's a time when you can come in and say, oh, I've had a heck of a day and, you know, I need a break or come and have a coffee with somebody.
Well, I started off as a mother and...
Len?
Yes?
I want vertex there.
Oh, do you think you can try sniffing them up for me while I
No.
talk? Yes, early starts.
Chaos.
Yeah, mad rushes and then calms. When I had 3 under 5, it was 3 under 3.5, it was a mad rush all the time, but you just got into a routine and you just coped. And then as one went off to school, the pressure came off because you had a bit of time left during the day to actually do all those little jobs. And yes, you just become a very good time management person.
Slide all day, Anthony.
Yeah, so make that it's a
you're always
24-hour
aware
job.
of what they're doing and where they are, and even when they're not there, that you're still sort of thinking, I hope they're all right, and I hope that, you know, you're still worrying about them all the time. You can be very isolated when you live and work in your own home. But when you come out here and you see that everyone else has sort of got screaming kids and dirty nappies and all the other good things that go with it as well. Pretty. Then you just sort of cope that much better at home because you know that you're not the only one that's doing this. You know, we're shaping the next generation, so it really does depend a lot on how we do it. Yes, I'll catch you.
When you leave work, it's the status of woman just goes boom, as according to society, but here we all take on jobs and we're valued for what we do, however small that role might be. So I think that's really important.
Kathy, a young, middle-class housewife, spends her days preparing food, setting the table, serving meals, clearing food and dishes from the table, washing dishes, ironing, keeping an eye on or playing with the children, dressing her children, disciplining children, taking the children to daycare or to school, disposing of garbage, dusting, gathering clothes for the washing, doing the laundry, going to the gas station and the supermarket, repairing household items, making beds, paying bills, sewing or mending or knitting, talking with door-to-door salespeople, cutting the grass, weeding, answering the telephone, vacuuming, sweeping and washing the floors, shoveling snow, cleaning the bathroom and kitchen and putting her children to bed. Kathy has to face the fact that she fills her time in a totally unproductive manner. She too is economically inactive and economists record her as unoccupied. Ben is a highly trained member of the US military. His regular duty is to descend to an underground facility where he waits with a colleague. When I wrote this, it was a colleague, but now, due to drug abuse in the US military, it's with 2 colleagues, for hours at a time for an order to fire a nuclear missile.
And insert the keys and strap into your chair. My key is inserted. Check. So we're ready for step 35, key turning commit time. Roger. And I show us in a good window, so let's go ahead and commit. Okay, we'll commit. We'll simultaneously rotate both keys, and this will send out the launch commands to the missiles to allow them to launch. Ready on my mark? I'm ready. 3, 2, 1, mark. Hold it for 5 seconds. And release. I show key turn is accomplished. And I've got another alarm to let us know that the launch command went through. Check. At that point, we're hoping that another crew within the squadron is going to be turning keys the same way that we did. It takes 2 crews turning keys at the same time to actually launch the missiles. We work on a 2-vote system, so the 1 vote will send a launch command. The missiles will wait for a second launch vote from another launch control center before they will actually launch. After that, it's automatic.
So skilled and effective is Ben that if his colleague were to attempt to subvert an order to fire, Ben would, if all else failed, be expected to kill him to ensure a successful missile launch.
Well, we're trained so highly in our recurring training that we take every month in simulators like this, so that if we actually had to do it, it would be an almost automatic thing. There wouldn't be time for any reflection until after we turn the keys.
Ben is in paid work. he is economically active. His work has value and contributes as part of the nuclear machine to the nation's growth, wealth, and productivity.
Since the mid-70s, New Zealanders had begun to demonstrate against the visit of nuclear-powered or nuclear weapons-bearing ships to New Zealand. Well, the nuclear ships issue wasn't just a matter of not having nuclear weapons in New Zealand. It was a whole question of sovereignty. Here on the wharf in Wellington, by treaty, New Zealand was prohibited to store, possess, transport, use nuclear weapons. This seemed to me to be treated with utmost contempt by a so-called ally, the United States, who would draw ships up alongside our wharves, you know, that were nuclear powered or that would have nuclear arms on them. And the only connection we had with that industry was the harbouring of these boats. And so if we were to do anything, the least and the only thing we could do was to ban them from New Zealand, from our territorial waters, from beside our walls. New Zealanders felt this very keenly. They didn't just feel it keenly as a peace issue. They felt it very strongly as an environmental issue. I lived on the hills behind the harbour here. I used to run to work every morning, and I remember the mornings I used to have to run past the warships here, and I would just feel this knot in the gut of my stomach and think, we just don't want them here. I mean, there must be a way in which a people can say that. There should be no nuclear weapons inside our sovereign territory.
Those were the words of an MP who wouldn't back down, and that was the conviction that led to the Prime Minister admitting he couldn't count on her vote on the nuclear issue.
The government had been re-elected with a majority of only one. But, you know, under the Commonwealth system, there are only two matters of confidence on which a government can fall if they lose in the House. One is on the economy, and the other is on matters of national security and defence.
No, you can't govern on that basis. You've got to govern with a certain majority.
Close to midnight and in high spirits, the Prime Minister with the announcement that shocks the nation, a snap election.
Would you? Well, no, 6 and bring them in fast.
There's a sense of urgency about Parliament by now.
I just withdrew from the government on the nuclear legislation, and it forced an election, forced an urgent election.
Sir Robert blamed Waipower MP Marilyn Waring for not guaranteeing her support for his late-night ride to Government House and the dissolution of Parliament.
In almost 3 terms, she's crossed the floor more times than any MP in New Zealand's recent history. But it's been a long and often lonely fight. For 2 of those terms, she was the only female government MP. On some issues, she's made enemies, and during the nuclear debate, her political energy was running dry. Our attempts to contact Marilyn Waring today have been unsuccessful. She hasn't been in her office all day and appears to have gone underground.
Yeah. Well, quite frankly, I didn't agree with it. But there you are, it happened, and, you know, you've got to respect Marilyn for her dedication and her beliefs. And as I say, that's democracy working. That's a prime example, isn't it? That, you know, one person like that can bring the government down.
She had the majority of people saying, well, good on you, Marilyn, for saying the things you are saying, and that she had a reputation for being fearless and speaking her mind, which I think was... ordinary people appreciated that very much indeed.
The election was fought on nuclear-free New Zealand, and it was a resounding victory. 72% of New Zealanders voted for it.
Did you have any doubts when you walked across that floor? You knew that the government that was in power, the government that you were a member of, good for.
Sure. I mean, but that's what you said. I mean, it always amazed me that that's not what members of Parliament realise they're there for. I mean, there ought to have been 86 other people sitting there thinking that. That's our job, it seemed to me. I mean, if you're elected to go represent the people, you ought to be ready at any minute, at any hour, at any day to go on principle. It's not a job for life. You know, it's part of the job description is that you go on principle, not sit around and wait until the polls kick you out.
Got to stand up on high ground.
The constituency was in good hands. Catherine O'Regan had taken over my old parliamentary seat. So I had some time for intensive research, and I set off to try to unscramble the codes of global economics. Came to New York to the UN Library, I didn't really have much idea what I expected to find. It was just that this is where the search kept leading me. Everyone kept saying, well, there are a set of rules, and they're called the United Nations System of National Accounts. And if you want to read the full set, this is where you've got to come. So it was either going to be the end of the search or the beginning of a whole new one. The United Nations Statistical Commission has annual conferences. Each year, most countries will send their chief statistician or their retiring government statistician or whoever it is who wants this little trip off to the conference. And they will mostly work on documents that have been assembled by the professionals inside the Statistical Commission. It is certainly dominated by ideologues from the United States and works very, very closely with the World Bank and the IMF. And the difficulty is, of course, that hardly anybody from various governments' treasuries, those people who actually define macroeconomic policy, come anywhere near these conferences, have any idea what the new rules are, let alone have ever read them. When massive international rules are operating in a situation where no one who is implementing them is required to read them, then you know immediately you have a massive set of propaganda operative. But it was also so offensive, so chronically malevolent. And every day or two, I'd find yet another truly horrendous paragraph that meant I had to keep going. The worst day of all was when I discovered the paragraph, subsistence production and the consumption of their own produce by non-primary producers is of little or no importance. What this really means is that the work of non-primary producers, housewives, mothers, who are bearing and raising children, doing laundry, making home preserves, keeping a herb garden, in fact, most of the work that women do in an unpaid capacity, anywhere on the planet, macroeconomically, is of little or no importance. Well, after, I guess, about 2 months of reading through the System of National Accounts, you can start to believe you're slightly crazed or that you're not reading things properly, because the distortions between what is in the rules and what is real life that you observe is so extreme that I kept thinking I'm still missing something. And so again, I went to talk to John Kenneth Galbraith and said to me, look, for goodness sake, write it. Stop talking about this. You've known enough, you've read enough, just write it.
Well, I'm very proud of that. I have quite a few visits, so not all are strong in my memory, but I certainly remember her coming to see me. We had a long talk, I guess more than one, about the role of women in the economic system. The whole tendency in economics is to take the monetary economy, the pecuniary economy, not only as the basic thing to be measured. If there isn't money involved, if there isn't a price, you don't measure it. And that leaves women's work in the household and a great deal of child care and so forth out of the national accounts. There it is enormously productive work, both for human enjoyment and for the welfare of the economy and the growth of the economy, that doesn't get counted. And it was this that Marilyn was concerned with, as indeed I would like to think I have been.
The system was developed by John Maynard Keynes and Richard Stone, based on a pamphlet they wrote called, literally, The British National Income and How to Pay for the War. And this became the basis of national income accounting. At the end of the war, like so many other things, if Britain had it and Germany didn't have it, it was credited with part of the reason why the United Kingdom had so-called won the war. Stone was then recruited by the new United Nations organization to take the rules that he'd had in Britain and to enlarge upon them for international consumption. Of course, he didn't really. He just translated what was a system that suited the British Empire into a neo-colonial exercise for the whole world. And so by 1953, that set of rules was imposed on every country, including all the newly emergent independent countries. It's called the United Nations System of National Accounts, and to a significant extent, it governs all our lives. All nations must conform to these rules of economic measurement, or they cannot belong to the United Nations. They cannot borrow from the World Bank or secure any loans from the International Monetary Fund. Important decisions are made with these figures, decisions which will determine whose needs are met first. Decisions on how to spend your tax dollar. Decisions on killing the planet. Decisions on who will live or die. These measurements do not include everything. They are highly selective, though of course they maintain a pretense of objectivity. So what is included and excluded in this system? The system includes everything that goes through the marketplace. Everything which has a cash-generating capacity. In other words, the system recognizes no value other than money. Regardless of how that money is made. This means that there is no value to peace. This means that there is no value to the preservation of natural resources for future generations. This means there is no value to unpaid work, including the unpaid work of reproducing human life itself, including the unpaid work of women who feed and nurture their own families. This system cannot respond to values it refuses to recognize. This system leaves out the work of half the population of the planet and the planet itself. It is the cause of massive poverty, illness and death of millions of women and children, and it is encouraging environmental disaster. This is an economic system that can eventually kill us all.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this, the second Dubai International Aerospace Show. I think everybody has been staggered by the enormous success of the event this year, with comfortably over 400 companies exhibiting from all over the world, widespread of aircraft of every class. The Dubai show is now incontestably running in third place behind Paris and Farnborough.
The international trade in arms is the biggest growth industry of all.
Scout aircraft for acquiring targets at day or night. It worked in Desert Storm with...
The 5 permanent members of the Security Council are also the 5 leading arms exporters in the world.
Out beyond 10 kilometers. Yes, sir, at night. Yes, sir. And daytime beyond 15 kilometers. Excellent mass-mounted sight.
Killing people, or preparing to kill them, is considered very valuable in the international economic system. Arms exports account for more than half the trade surplus of the developed economies. But the death, homelessness, injury, poverty and starvation caused by the use of these weapons is not even registered as a deficit.
Rocket system, essentially. Has that been tested in the Gulf War?
Yes, the Royal Air Force used it off Jaguar aircraft in the Gulf War.
Oh, yes.
Used it against anti-shipping targets, clustered artillery, dispersed artillery, and some work sites.
Yes, and it has proven
quite
effective.
Successful.
And mainly computer-oriented electronics.
To some degree, yes, but we're also doing and teaching a lot of hands-on hard training as well. We're involved in some of the more sophisticated, if you will, warfare type, electronic warfare type training as well. And it's something that can be audited or assessed, and at any time we know how we're proceeding with the client country or clients themselves.
The rewards are tremendous.
This aircraft is being rebuilt and modernized by the Canadian Air Force. And we're the company that's doing that.
We depend on sales, essentially, on export.
Indeed. It's absolutely essential.
Yeah.
If a country develops an economic system that is based on how to pay for the war, and if the amounts of fixed capital investment that are apparent are tied up in armaments, and if that country is a major exporter of arms and its industrial fabric is dependent on them, then it would be in that country's interests to ensure that it always had a market. It is not an exaggeration to say that it is clearly in the interests of the world's leading arms exporters to make sure that there is always a war going on somewhere.
The aerospace world is very competitive.
Yes, it is.
How do you rate Bristol Aerospace itself and Canada in terms of the competition now from our European allies, essentially?
I think we're as competitive as most, if not a little more competitive. We do run into problems. We have some competition, as an example, from the United States, where the government really gets in and pushes hard. And the support is very evident there.
It has clearly been in the interests of the United States to sustain war and political tension in the Persian Gulf region since the oil shock of 1974-1975.
Steve Barton pulling hard into a very tight radius, 360-degree turn, pulling 9G at least, demonstrating the aircraft's complete capability of maneuvering at very high G and very high thrust. You see him demonstrating the full capability of fly-by-wire. He has got the stick hard over in one corner of the cockpit, the rudder hard over in the other, and the computer is essentially checking the aircraft in a steady spiral descent, not allowing it for 1 minute to get out of control. Now, the great importance of this in any combat aircraft is that it frees the pilot's entire attention from looking out of the window and at what he's supposed to be doing, which is attacking the enemy. Capability of the aircraft removes an enormous workload from the pilot. And that, as he comes out from that, pulling up now, easing back throttle, pulling up to circuit height, gear coming down, coming back, he must be landing to close.
Your Highness, in the long show we saw today, which was very spectacular, was there anything that caught your fancy that you would like to have?
Of course, sitting here, we're seeing many nice things. And I think this is called defense. And defense is make the peace last. And I think we need the support of all the nations in the United Nations for this peace.
Every minute, 30 children die from want of food and inexpensive vaccines. And every minute, the world's military budget absorbs $1.3 million of the public treasury. This is war. The United States now devotes over $200 billion a year to military defense against foreign enemies. But 45% of Americans are afraid to go out alone at night within 1 mile of their homes. This is war. For every 100,000 people in the world, there are 556 soldiers, but only 85 doctors. This is war. For every soldier, the average world military expenditure is $22,000. For every school-aged child, the average public education expenditure is $380. This is war. The cost of a single new nuclear submarine equals the annual education budget of 23 developing countries with 160 million school-aged children. This is war. War is marketable. War pays, literally. War contributes to growth and development. The amount of money spent on armaments in just 2 weeks could provide safe water for the entire world. These two children are photographed in the Philippines the morning after a really rugged storm. The job for these children, they're not playing. They're down here trying to fish whatever might be usable for their families out of all of this debris, this putrid stink. And I watched them for hours, and they fished little bits of clothing, things like an old door handle out of the water and put it in their treasure bag, ready to take home. But this kind of water is, you know, a bearer of major diseases, of river blindness, of all kinds of typhus. Very close to where I took these pictures, there were families, 12, 14 of them, sleeping in something not much bigger than a shipping container. And with several hundred dependent on one sort of broken down pump for any water that they might need. The Philippines can be seen as a microcosm of the entire developing world. These are the hills overlooking the port city of Cebu in the southern part of the Philippines. It's a rural area which has been left vacant by an absentee landowner. A group of families have moved on to this land and built their huts and established a community here. Most of the men only get sporadic jobs, or they provide cheap labor for some of the large cash crop plantations around the country. So it's really up to the women themselves to provide for the children. The average Filipino woman has 8 children to raise and no access to abortion, family planning, or divorce. You can imagine the anxiety that a mother of 8 must feel if she doesn't know where she's going to get enough food to feed them all every day. This is the reason that women in rural areas all over the world grow food crops or raise farm animals. This sort of farming is usually called subsistence agriculture. It doesn't involve the exchange of money, but it does ensure that these children will eat. The system of national accounts says that the domestic and personal services which don't count are the cleaning, decoration, and maintenance of the dwelling occupied by the household, the cleaning, servicing and repair of household goods, the care of the sick, infirm or old people, the transportation of members of the household or their goods, the preparation and serving of meals, the care, training and instruction of children. The World Bank would argue that to change the conditions of life for these people requires export growth. To make room for productive exporting enterprises, these unproductive women and their families would simply be kicked off the land. The new company could then take further advantage of the homelessness it had helped to create by getting cheap labor here. The number of homeless children in the urban squalor of developing countries is now epidemic in its proportions. This resourceful mother has managed to keep her family together by moving right into the city garbage dump. These cardboard boxes are home to her family of 5. Here, the entire family can work collecting scrap metal or plastic or whatever can be sold to the junk shops in order to buy food. The cycle of poverty begins to repeat itself very early, as the eldest girl in a family at age 8 or 9 is expected to give up school and look after her youngest siblings, while her mother uses that time to do whatever she can to keep her family alive. Older boys may be left to fend for themselves and to sleep in the streets. Female sexual slavery is a major growth industry worldwide. And where a multi-million-dollar industry in prostitution is operating, full advantage is taken of this grinding poverty. Jennifer and Renren are 10-year-olds. They're just 2 of the children available through this Japanese brochure, which sells men-only tourist junkets to the Philippines. Recent studies in Thailand, which also has a lucrative business in female sexual slavery, have shown that 70% of the women and girls have become infected with the HIV virus. Those who sexually exploit children are counted as doing productive work, increasing economic growth. Even if their activities are illegal, they're considered valuable enough to be in the calculations because they're income generating. Here, foreign-owned companies and a small Filipino elite own 90% of the land. In a country of 58 million people, 20 million are now homeless. Thanks to multinational monocrop plantations, the Philippines is the 14th largest exporter of food in the world. And yet 80% of the children who live here can't get enough to eat. Over 1 billion people on the planet are malnourished. In the developing countries, 50,000 people a day die from malnutrition. "17 million children in the world die each year from diseases that are related to poverty. 2/3 of these deaths are preventable." The gross domestic product claims to measure the well-being of a country. When my friends Imelda and Loris harvest New Zealand seafood for their families, it isn't seen as economically valuable. But if they went and bought the oysters in tins at the supermarket, then that would be counted.
Before the Europeans come on, the Maoris never ever had electricity and things like that, so their food mainly depended on from the sea, was gathered from the sea. We have a custom that's called kai moana, and its meaning is gathering of food, mainly shellfish from the sea. We go out when the tide's low and pick up seafood, mussels, oysters. The oysters take about 2 to 3 years to grow, so that's why you just take a little bit.
Yeah, we only usually take enough food for a meal, you know.
Then if you're still hungry in a couple of days, you come back and get another bucket full, and then you have them fresh all the time.
We don't basically go to the same place, we go all over the place, you know. Over the years, we've just learned where to you know, get the bigger ones from, because we watched Mum and Dad do it. We get them mainly for family, or the Maoris, if they've got a tangi or a hui on, they usually go and gather shellfish or, you know, catch fish for the hui.
And then you take it back to the marine, everybody just mingles in and you all open it.
Them up and put them in dishes and cook. And then they put them out on the table for supper or tea or whatever.
You have a big feast.
But we never sell it. The old Maoris don't sell shell food. It's not meant to be. It's meant, you know, they
give it away. You never ever sell it. You get the odd one who'll take it back to the cities to sell, but the elders usually come down hard on them and say it's costing you nothing. And if you come and take a whole lot of food from here, then the next person that comes along to get some can't find it because you're taking it all away and selling it for money. You should leave it for food.
Well, if I'm going down to a beach to collect kai moana, I always behave the way that I've been taught by the local people, by the Māori people. And I find in this and in so many of the practices in Aotearoa in New Zealand that they make perfect sense. I mean, both perfect economic sense, perfect environmental sense, perfect ecological sense, from, you know, centuries of tradition of indigenous people. So why change it? Why behave any other way? The children playing on this beach in New Zealand have an increased risk of developing skin cancer because of the ultraviolet radiation that's getting through the atmosphere's protective ozone layer. The manufacture of chlorofluorocarbons, which cause the ozone depletion, counters growth in the international economic system. And if ozone depletion continues, aquatic life will be killed, weather patterns will change, crop yields will be diminished, and the increase in cancers will rise dramatically. While people may choose to stay indoors, plants and animals can't and will be weakened from radiation damage. On the positive side, there'll be increased markets for sunblocks, skin creams, sunglasses, other protective gear, medical insurance. There'll be an increased demand for medical goods and services, particularly in the field of dermatology. And this will increase the GDP. And a rise in the GDP indicates that the well-being of the community is improving. That's what the international economic system says. I certainly feel in this entire journey that my constituents and then women and the ecosystem has been my teachers. Well, it was very early when I was a Member of Parliament. There was an application made for a prospecting licence on Mount Pirongia by a company called Gold Mines New Zealand. And the planning procedure was such that the mining company could show all the apparent good that was going to accrue to all of this area. We'll provide loads of jobs, we'll provide loads of support to the service infrastructures. You know, your schools will stay open, you'll get more roading, your post offices, all of those kinds of services. Your electricians and plumbers and everybody else will have loads of jobs while we're involved in all of this. There'll be export earnings, it's gold we're talking about. There'll be substantial reductions in overseas funds. You know, we'll be here for years. Yeah, the usual growth development kinds of arguments. No debit side, you notice. There's never any debit side in terms of this kind of development. Nobody talking about what you're going to do with all the materials that you take out of the mountain that then begin to leach into surrounding farmland. The kind of scarring that would be happening in the bush and the forest and the mountains, the ruin of the habitat of so many species. Colin Murray was a party official in my constituency and a key member of the local farmers' organisation working against the gold mine licence.
It's a fascinating mountain because it's different every day. A little bit of cloud behind it. It was a volcano originally. It also plays a big part in our lives because it affects the weather so much. We have 90-inch rainfall here, which makes this area so good for dairying and farming generally. And that's brought about to a very, very large extent by Mount Pirongia. The water around here, I have a lovely stream through the farm across the road there, and the water, the tests that the Waikato Regional Authority have done on the water, it's amongst the purest water in the country, and that's just something you can't put a value on.
Economics is a tool of people in power. I mean, economics didn't just come up from nowhere. It's a tool of those who want to exploit. It's a justification. And so as a so-called science, it doesn't allow for the introduction of values that don't find their way into a mathematical formula. It also operates in terms of language. You know, if you want to argue that mining this mountain would be devastating, you are invited to use a whole lot of words that are called soft, you know, flaky, value-laden, subjective. Economics has got it down really tight, you know, so that if you're not talking their language, if you're not talking in their jargon, you're not part of the argument. You know, there must be something wrong with you. You know, you're not sensible or intelligent about your approach to this thing. So the power of economics mirrors to a great extent, you know, the political power rampant anywhere else. You operate with language as well as operating with mathematics. The economic activity that the mountain is engaged in is like 24 hours a day, never ending. It's the habitat for the pollinating species without which none of this agriculture could survive. It's controlling the microclimate for the production that comes from everything out here. It's breathing, I mean, it's creating oxygen. And it provides hundreds of hours for just what is euphemistically called leisure and recreation, tramping. None of those features can find a very easy expression in terms of cost-benefit analysis. I mean, you can't run around and say, oh, well, so much oxygen is being produced from these trees on a 24-hour basis, and the same volume of oxygen in containers in a hospital would equal, and therefore the 24-hour oxygen production of this mountain equals. I mean, who's going to do that? This entire story so early in my political years demonstrated to me the absolute hollowness of the mathematical formula that we have to work with. I met with federated farmers, the environmentalists, the rural local authorities, the city councillors, and we sat and discussed this mountain and what it meant to us. To point out where the problems are. And we were invited to somehow or other number crunch all of those values into an economic equation and to set ourselves up against Gold Mines New Zealand Limited.
There was a tremendous uproar from the locals and plenty of meetings, well attended, and with Marilyn Waring's help we managed to block the miners so that that's not going to take place now. It's a forest reserve now. It's all that bush-clad mountain is reserved as a forest park. You know, this farming that you can see all around you is here forever. It's not going to go away, and we're producing something far more valuable than gold. We're producing food and clothing for people, wool and so on. And, you know, mankind can do without gold, but you can't last long without food. You know, that was our argument, and I think it's the argument. This goes on forever if we look after it. It's ours for a short time while we're here on Earth, but someone else has then got to take over, and providing we look after it, it should get better and better.
It was just a local story, you know, in my constituency. But I think as an analogy, it can be expanded to the whole planet.
But what are we after then? What are the alternatives? Your country, Canada, or mine, New Zealand, where there are political will, could establish qualitative environmental indicators. Indicators that told us what was happening to water quality, air quality, the remaining stands of forest, the exploitation of mineral resources, the reproduction of fish species, the habitats of endangered species. There is no reason why tomorrow Canada or New Zealand could not establish time use surveys, because the one common denominator that all of us have, the one thing we might be said to choose to exchange, that is our own, is time. And time is a better description of the needs for intervention in people's lives than any other indicator. It shows you where the crisis points are. It shows you where the service needs are as a policymaker. In a study conducted by the Commission on the Status of Women in Canada, it was demonstrated that 2/3 of all primary health care took place in the home. If 2/3 of the budget for primary health care were directed towards those responsible for that care, imagine what would happen to that budget. and how that budget would be redistributed, and how the priorities would be turned on their head. These are the kinds of effects, in a budgetary sense, that would flow from time use surveys. Why don't policymakers or politicians or bureaucrats like this idea? Well, first of all, it's terrifying. They would have to exercise judgment. They don't have a unidimensional set of figures to which they can look and say, is growth up or down? Thereby hangs our decision. Language is a tool available to all of us. None of you, when you leave this room, should ever again say, my mother doesn't work, my wife doesn't work. That particularly relates to people who are in media or teaching positions. Take your census form. It says, what is your primary occupation? Well, be inventive. Pick up the business pages of Saturday's paper. Be a logistics analyst. Be a management supervisor. Be anything that fits, you know, the kinds of things that you do. Just don't be a housewife, don't be a home engineer, don't be anything that uses the word house or home in it. You know, how many hours a week do you work? 96, 107, whatever it is. How many weeks a year do you work? 52. For whom do you work? Well, that's an exciting one. What's the name of your company? I found that women can be extremely inventive here. It's good fun mucking up the census. We've got that rolling in quite a few countries. Push for parity. Join political parties and go to their annual conferences and year after year after year drive them crazy. Half the candidates shall be women. Half the candidates shall be women. Join this party till you get it through, then move on to the next one. I mean... Just as there is no one-way feminism, there is no one political tactic available here. There is no one political strategy. It is broad and as wide as our imaginations can take it once we have heard and seen and recognised that the emperor has no clothes. You must choose, judge, assess the strategy and tactic in your environment, in those communities that I don't have access to, just as I do it in communities you won't have access to. I mean, the only principles are that we don't stop, that we are rigorous, that we recognise that it's hard work, and lastly and not least, that we have a lot of fun along the way.
I had all kinds of ideas when I was in politics about what I was going to do and what I should do. But the truth of it was I just got so envious of my constituents. And whatever kind of fanciful notions I might have had about what I should do, this just called out to me, just too much. I couldn't go past it. And at that particular point in time, I wanted to be bigger. I think that was the result of the years in Parliament. Yeah, I wanted to be the boss. I wanted to be part of trying to restore the environment and looking after animals. The majority of women in the world live in rural areas and developing countries. The overwhelming number of them are engaged in some kind of primary production, and if they have animals, they're likely to have goats. It has many uses, you know, various kinds of goats. You can milk them, you can use their fleece, their fibre to make various kinds of clothing. You know, a woman in a lot of the poor countries who has a couple of goats that she can get a kid out of each year, that kid means another year of education for a child of hers.
This is Tofu. He's very good with unwelcome visitors, aren't you? Yes, he puts his horns down and he butts them. He just trained himself. He's a very good guard goat, and he just butts people who are unwelcome, and it's very good. He likes attacking their cars. And so there's a number of people who drive up my drive who never get out of their car, really, if Tofu's at the gate. Hey, you're a very good friend. Yes, I know. I'm not so bad myself. You go get the sound, lady. Go on. The 3 sheep are Wink and Blink and a Nod. And I got them because I like knitting, and I wanted some black fleeces. And also they look, you know, they look nice among the goats.
Take your money, keep it. Don't tell me who to become. Take your age-old wisdom with you to kingdom come. Degrees and all that education won't help me where I come from. Born and raised in a country beside the river, my home. Born and raised in a country beside the river, my home. And ain't life sweet when we know what we're doing? Ain't life sweet when we're not afraid to care? Ain't life sweet when we know what we're doing? Ain't life sweet when we're not afraid to care?